Hello and welcome to Vlogmas 2021. I am Katie from Crafting Ruby Dreams, where I usually talk about planners, goal setting, writing, publishing, and getting right with my finances, with today being the first day of Vlogmas and the Santa tree behind me, thanks to my sister's fabulous decorative efforts at my parents'. I am going to do a quick rundown of some of my favorite reads of 2021 in case you are looking for gifts for this year for somebody, or if you're just looking for something to read for yourself when you have downtime during this next month. So, first up, we're going to do the nonfiction selections, and I'm just reading off of my phone, but I will stick probably here the covers so that you can see what they look like, and I will link all of these books down below in the description with affiliate links, and if you choose to use those, I appreciate your support. None of those will add to the cost of the books for you, and I hope you truly enjoy them. In fact, let me know down in the comments what your favorite books of 2021 are, either for yourself or ones that you're giving as gifts. First up, like I said, nonfiction. A lot of these will be kind of businessy books, since that's what I tend to read when I read nonfiction. And it is We Should All Be Millionaires by Rodgers. The tone of this book is just very inspirational for me, which means that it may not be for everybody, but it is very mission driven, very purpose driven, and belief that every single person has the ability to make themselves millionaires and use that money for good purposes. I would strongly suggest checking it out if you are looking for a book on general personal finance as well as money mindset. The next book is Profit First by Mike. I believe his last name is pronounced Michalowicz. It's Polish, and I could probably be butchering it. I apologize if I am. This is the book to read after you've read We Should All Be Millionaires. We Should All Be Millionaires is a lot of mindset stuff. Profit First is about the mindset of actually managing your money. And it's, I think, a very interesting way of readjusting how you think about money, especially your business money. And I am going to be implementing a lot of the things I learned in this book. And I have a lot of friends who have read this book, and it has made a significant difference in the way they are managing their business money and finances. So I strongly recommend it. The next book is The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, and I picked this up because of We Should All Be Millionaires, which means if the tone of We Should All Be Millionaires works for you, you may also really enjoy The Big Leap. And there was actually a follow-up book that came out either at the beginning of this year or last year called The Genius Zone, and it's very actually similar to what I have learned with Clifton Strengths, in that you are leaning into things that you already do well and really elevating what you do well to whole other levels, so you are able to exponentially grow with what your genius zone is, essentially. But if you're interested in things like Clifton Strengths and success management and success in general, this is definitely a book you should check out and see if the tone works for you. The next book is Cultish by Montell. This is the only not business book on this list for this year, but I found it really fascinating. It is specifically about linguistics and the way language is used for fanatical purposes and positive or negative, abusive, high control. I found it just really fascinating and really interesting, and how the way language is very much used in controlling ways, whether or not it's intended to be a negative controlling way or a, hey, let's just build up all this fun stuff. And it's made me actually pretty cognizant of how I use language, or at least how I try to use language. I will say that if you are interested in cults and the cult aspect, I do have a friend who is a religious studies scholar, and when I mentioned that I was really into this book and recommended it on Twitter, she replied back saying, I really hated that book. So from a religious studies perspective, this is probably not the best book on cults. And in fact, I want to let you know that my friend recommended, let's see, it is Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing. And the author on that is Lauren Huff, or Howe. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. So if you're interested in cults, I recommend checking out both Cultish as well as Leaving Isn't the Hardest Thing. And then the final book in the nonfiction list is Seven Figure Fiction by T. Taylor. Now, this is specifically about writing, and specifically about genre writing. So if you're not a writer, this is probably one to pass by. But if you know a genre fiction writer in your life, this might be something to let them know about. And it is thinking about how you construct story and how you construct both the story itself of your book as well as the story that you are telling readers to convince them to buy the book, and how you layer on what Theodora calls butter. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about writing and storytelling, especially if you're at all familiar with Jennifer Lynn Barnes and her Writing for Your id talks, or the Science of Fiction blog posts that she has done. It was really, really excellent for the way I already try to think about the way I tell stories. On to the fiction reads. Now, admittedly, these are very romance heavy because I am primarily a romance reader, but I really enjoy these and I look forward to hearing what your suggestions are in the comments. So the first up, Elf Night by Nalini Singh, and this book actually came out last year. It was a reread for me, but I really adore this particular story. It is love at first sight, and within the text of the story, it actually, Nalini addresses within the story itself how the female main character is like, this is total bunk. I don't understand what just happened. She doesn't believe in it. So that was just also really interesting. It helps to have some familiarity with the series. It's part of the Psy Changeling series, and specifically the second cycle that began with Silver Silence. But I think you could get into the main story itself with a little problem. And so this is paranormal with shifters, wolf shifters in particular. And it's just, I think, a really fun book within the scope of the story. It's not light necessarily by any means, but it's still, there's a funness to it. And to follow that up, the book in the series that came out this year is The Last Guard, again by Nalini Singh, and I really enjoyed the heart of this story. Both the female main character as well as the male main character were characters that you don't typically see in fiction and romance fiction up until the last few years. The female main character is neurodivergent and the male main character is a wheelchair user. And so it was just really interesting to see how both of these characters interacted with each other, and they have a backstory together. They briefly knew each other as children in a particularly traumatic event, which is how it opens. So just to be aware of that. It was a really, really good story that Nalini, pretty much in every single book that she writes, she makes me ugly cry at least at one point, and this was no exception. But I reread this story later in the year and absolutely adored it, and I plan on rereading it again. The next book, I will give fair warning, it's not out until next March. I got to read an advanced reader copy thanks to being a librarian and all of that stuff, but it is Crowbones by Anne Bishop, and it is the part of the World of the Others series. So she had this series well, actually almost 10 years ago it started, called The Others. And there was 5 books in that main series. And then after she finished that, she wrote a spin-off book called Lake Silence. And this book, Crowbones, is a direct sequel to Lake Silence, the book that came out after Lake Silence. It's set in the same world, but it's not related to Lake Silence. In fact, this is a recommendation to me. If you read this series, I would start with the main series, The Others, and then I would read book 2 in this spin-off series. Do not read Lake Silence first. The reason being, Wild Country, which is book 2 in this spin-off series, actually takes place only a few months after the end of the main series, whereas Lake Silence takes place a whole year after, and therefore the tone is off between the two. And so it really makes a lot more sense to, if you're reading now and you haven't read any of them before, read The Others, then read Wild Country, and then read Lake Silence. And then you can also read Crowbones when it comes out. So this is more paranormal urban fantasy. There are romantic elements to it, but it's not in your face. It's not paranormal romance in the way that the Side Changeling series by Nalini Singh is paranormal, is romance. Okay, next up are 2 books by Sarina Bowen. And I've been on Sarina's newsletter list for years, but hadn't ever really actually read her books. I got hooked in with one of her free newsletter stories a few years ago. And then she did another newsletter serial earlier this year, and I was reading along. I'm like, oh yeah, I really like this. I really like you know what? I need to read about this character that you just introduced to the newsletter serial, who was very clearly an established character in the world. And so I went off and read Superfan, which is about a famous singer-songwriter and the hockey player that she had a kind of brief, almost but not quite fling with one summer. And he is now on this professional hockey team. And it's part of the Brooklyn Bruisers series, which is this whole hockey team. And it was just really fun, really good. And I have a thing for rockstar romances. I'm very picky about them, but this was just totally right up my alley, and I loved it, and resulted in me binging pretty much every related book that Sarina has written, and it was a lot of fun of reading almost nonstop for 2 weeks. So I definitely recommend Superfan, but I also recommend Loverboy, which was part of a spin-off series. And this is more about a kind of like undercover super spy but not spy private investigator group, and the male main character has to go undercover to work in a coffee shop. He does not like coffee. He has never had a point to learn how to make coffee, and he's supposed to be this most excellent barista and is all to be undercover. So it was really fun and funny to read about this intense training he has to go through this one weekend and what they do. And so if you like romantic suspense, but not super heavy romantic suspense, I definitely recommend this particular book set in New York City. And again, it's called Loverboy, and the author is Sarina Bowen. The book I want to recommend is The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. Now, this is fantasy. It is got a lot of humor. It's also a lot of political intrigue. It's got amnesia. The main character, Miffany Thomas, wakes up with absolutely no memory of who she is, and she is surrounded by a circle of dead bodies, all wearing latex gloves. And she's standing in the rain in a deserted park in London. So, if that intrigues you, I definitely recommend checking this out. It is the first book of what is turning out to be a trilogy. I, in fact, reread it because I got notice that book 2 was briefly on sale for $2.99, and I was like, what's going on with this? Why have you dropped the price? And it turns out book 3 is due out next October. Daniel O'Malley is an extremely slow writer. But I appreciate that he makes no promises about the next book, so we just accept them as he gives them to us. So if you're interested in fantasy, real world, but all of the people in the rookery and the organization that Mythony works for all have super special powers of some kind, and it's a secret government organization that not everybody in the government knows exists. So that was The Rook by Daniel O'Malley, and that is my list of books that you might be interested in reading over the next month, or you may be interested in giving as a gift to someone you love. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and look for more videos from me through the course of December as part of Vlogmas, and may all your dreams be ruby dreams. Bye-bye.